Hello everyone and welcome today to this special event put on for New South Wales Seniors Festival. My name is Matthew Elder. I'm an Education and Training Officer at Carers New South Wales. And I want to thank you today for joining this session on getting the most out of later age, eating myths, misconceptions, and simple tips. Before I begin today, I just want to pay my respects to the traditional elders of the land, acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging, and to acknowledge that no matter where we are meeting today in this online space across New South Wales, it is the traditional lands that we're meeting on. So for myself, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. This session is run by Ngaire Hobbins. She's a dietitian who specialises in nutrition, ageing and dementia risk reduction. She's driven by a passion to ensure that people moving into and enjoying their senior years understand how different their nutrition needs are from those of younger adults. For carers of older people, she understands their unique differences, and it's key to living their best life possible in the years ahead, maximising independence and vitality for themselves and for the people they care for.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming along to this webinar. I'm Ngaire Hobbins. I'm a dietitian, and I've been a dietitian for 40 years-ish. But in the last 20 or so years, I've worked exclusively in this care and support of older people, older adults. And I came to that because I actually did a job 20-something years ago as a care support worker in community care when I had young children and I was doing something different for a change. And in that job, what I found was really interesting was that I could see that there were people who needed the right age-appropriate nutrition support and who weren't getting it. And in my role as just a care support worker, I wasn't able to do anything. So I actually got myself back into more clinical nutrition, and I worked with a care team that worked with a geriatrician, and we worked with older people in hospitals, in their homes, in the community, in aged care homes and the like, and we would support their care. And something that used to happen really often is that the geriatrician I worked with, who was a bit of a character, I have to say, in fact, this was in New South Wales, on the central coast of New South Wales at the time, he would say, oh, for heaven's sake, if we'd seen this guy that we're dealing with now, if we'd seen this person in the hospital bed or wherever we were dealing with a situation, if we'd seen this guy 5 years ago and you'd been able to talk to him about what he should be eating in order to live well in the years ahead, we wouldn't have to deal with this situation. And it was so frustrating. We'd see that over and over, and we would joke about writing books and doing something about it. And of course, ultimately I did write books about it, but at the time I didn't have any intention of writing books. But the frustration was that we would look for information we could give people, sometimes the person we were dealing with in the bed or aged care home or whatever, but often their family and friends and the carers supporting them, which comes to you guys, the carers supporting that older person. And I would look at the carers or the wife or husband or family member or whoever it was there and think, wow, if I don't talk to you, you're going to be in this situation in a while and we need to do something. But what happened was when we looked for information that was available for older people to speak specifically to their needs, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Almost every piece of nutrition information and health information and advice that you heard then and still that you hear now, something you might have heard on the television this week, something you might have read in the newspaper, in the latest magazine, almost all that information is for people who are 30, 40 or 50. And that same information can actually be unhelpful or harmful for people who are now late 60s on. And so it frustrated me then, and still continues to frustrate me, but that there wasn't messages directed directly to older people. Now it's starting to happen, but we've been banging on about this for at least 10 years. So 10 years ago, I decided to actually write something myself because there was nothing. And we'll talk at the end, but the book that I've written most recently is called Brain, Body, Food. And that book is all about older people living well into later age. And it gives the reasons why it's different and gives you tips and ideas. So the idea of that is that I want to support people who are moving towards their later years or who already are in their later years to live the best possible life in that time. And when you think about humans, we are designed to grow from that gorgeous little chubby baby into an adult structure. Now, the way that happens is that there's a whole lot of internal drivers. There's things that are inside our body, hormones and nerves, messages that are going endlessly to our body, so that when we eat food, the body is told to build muscle and build bone and build organs and brain tissue and whatever it happens to be, and keep on building and growing. And that's to make that adult body. But once you become the adult body, so once you are whatever that size, and some people mature at different stages, but say mid-40s, 50s, once you become that adult structure, you're not driven to grow any bigger, because if you were, you'd be a giant by the time you're in your mid-60s, and that doesn't happen. So after that adult structure, those drivers that are in the background that were building you are not there anymore, and that's normal. Now, when you think about it, most people who are now older get the fact that not very long ago, 70 was really old. 70 was the end of life for most people many years ago, or not that long ago, actually. And if you only had to make it to 70, then all that building that you'd done to your 40s or 50s would probably get you through without you doing anything different. But now, 70 is the beginning of life. 70 is the beginning of time that we're going to get those extra wonderful years, 20, 30, 40, whatever it is, years, and you want them to be good years. So all my message, everything I say is about making those extra years good ones and not dwindling into later age with a whole lot of issues. And of course, that's what all of us want. If you're caring for someone, they may already be struggling or be frail, and you're supporting them. There are things you can do. But if you're the carer, you need to support yourself, because you want to have a good life in the years ahead, and you want to be able to be there for the person you're caring for. So I am going to get, that's all the background story. I'm going to get to the actual specifics of why this is different. Now, the difference between an older and younger person, as I said, it comes down to that adult body versus maintenance. But basically, the difference comes down to what your muscles do. Your muscles are much more than what you need to move around, than what you need to walk from place to place, to get you up the stairs, to get in and out of bed, to get in and out of the chair, to play tennis, to do whatever you want to do. Your muscles let you do those things, but they are actually much more than that. Your muscles in your body are also your reserve of the nutrient called protein. Now, we have a number of nutrients that we store in the body. We store body fat, and everyone would know we store body fat. It's an excellent energy source, and we can store an unlimited amount pretty much. We also store a little bit of carbohydrate in the form of glycogen, and that carbohydrate is mostly the brain's fuel reserve. That carbohydrate, glycogen, is changed into glucose, which is the brain's main energy source and supplies the brain in those times that you're not actually eating. Because we don't eat 24 hours a day, but we need to supply the body 24 hours a day. Then we have the resource, the protein reserve, for a lot of other things the body does. But that protein reserve is not like carbohydrate and fat, which are just a pantry, basically, that you go into and get things out of when you need them. That protein reserve is also doing things. It's also your muscle. Now, what happens, because, as I said, we don't eat 24 hours a day, but 24 hours a day, we need protein to do a number of things. The first of those is we need protein to make immune system substances, immune system proteins. Those things fight off infection and illness. Even if you don't know you've got an infection, you're often fighting something off. They fight off infection and illness so that you recover better from illness themselves, so that you can avoid getting illness, and so that if you do get illnesses, they don't cause as severe problems for you. Now, that happens all the time, whether you're aware of it or not. Excuse me. As well as that, we have body organs always being repaired. You're always making new heart, kidney, lungs, skin, hair, whatever, cells throughout your body, always. And you're renewing all the time to provide those additional cells to repair and replace. That's always happening, no matter what happens. The difference, and if you're not actually eating at any time, you still need protein for that. And what happens is your muscles give up little bits of protein to keep those things going so that you can still keep doing them. And the other things that the muscle does, of course, is any sort of repair work that needs to be done. That might just be a scratch or a graze. You might have been doing some gardening on the weekend, you scratched yourself on a rose bush, that tiny little repair work, or anything as dramatic as surgery, or if you've had an accident and you've got more severe damage to yourself, if you've had oral work, dental surgery, any sort of work in your mouth, any sort of repair work, any bruises, all that repair work that needs to be done, that's protein. And I'm coming back to this in a minute, but I did mention the brain. Now, the brain, your muscles are also a reserve for your brain, something that is not where we don't think about. So when you look at the brain in this part of your body, it's only 2% of your body weight, your brain. But even though it's only a small amount of your body, it is using somewhere between 20 and 25% of the calories or the energy that your body's burning at any point in time. So about up to a quarter of the energy. Now, that's a lot of work being done in this structure compared to what your whole body is doing. Obviously, if you're doing physical activity, you're burning a bit more energy in the rest of your body. But just to be here listening to this webinar and paying attention and thinking about anything that you have to do, and also keeping your body running. You forget that while you're just sitting here seemingly doing very little, your brain is still keeping your heart going and your lungs going and all the other things it has to do. So that consumption of energy is a lot. And your brain, as I said earlier, your brain is completely reliant on glucose as its fuel supply. Now, glucose is a carbohydrate. You get it from starchy foods, sweet and starchy foods that we eat, but we're not eating 24 hours a day. So we also keep that little carbohydrate reserve that I mentioned in our bodies to keep the brain going, because of course you need your brain. Fair enough. But if you're not eating, that carbohydrate reserve will only last you for, well, it depends on the person, probably 2 days, 2.5 days maybe. Or if you're eating tiny amounts, that carbohydrate reserve you've got in your body. Now, of course, if you're ill for a period of time and you're eating very little or you're not eating, your brain still keeps going. So what happens is that the brain sources its fuel from somewhere else. And in an immense physiological inconvenience, you cannot make glucose out of body fat, because that'd be great. Because then while you're just sitting here listening to me right now, you could be just burning up body fat just by listening. But unfortunately, that doesn't work. But you can use body fat for your muscles, but you don't use it really for your brain. What you do use is protein. Protein is given up for the brain and converted to glucose, and that glucose can be used to the brain. So if you think about it, this system, there's a really good system of reserve of protein for all sorts of other things that the body needs. And your muscles are going to give up bits of protein if they need the extra for whatever reason. Now, if you're young, that loss of muscle that happens as a result of that does not matter, because as soon as you start eating again, all those driver messages go, put that muscle back in the muscle, put that protein back in the muscles, put it wherever it needed, build up again. But now that you're past adult age, so if you're 70 plus or even 60s plus, that muscle that you lost at that time may not go back. And the problem with that is somewhere down the track, what can happen is that if you lose enough of that muscle reserve, you might not be able to fight off the infection. You might not be able to get your immune system up to the peak it really should be. You might not be able to do all the wound repair you need. You might not be able to replenish your body organs, and you may not be able to provide fuel to your brain. Now, that's a long-term strategy, but remember, you've got 20, 30, 40 years. So you have to think the long-term strategy to be able to have those muscles there to support your body. You've got to remember that now, no matter how old you are, so you've got those internal drivers telling you to build muscle and bone and whatever it is, all those internal drivers, they might be gone. But there's one thing that always remains to tell your muscles, to remind your muscles they're needed, and that is doing things with them. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you do stuff with your muscles, it sends a signal to put protein back in them. Maybe not the same as happened when you're a 30-year-old bodybuilding type, but you get the strength and you maintain that reserve. So we've got this protein issue, and it's not an issue, it's just something that when you're beyond 70, you must be aware of. And I will come back to the protein in a little while. One thing I just want to mention, if someone, for example, is feeling particularly unwell and they are not eating very well for a period of time and they're lying in bed, many people will say to me, I'm not doing anything, so I don't need to eat very much. Now, this is a significant issue. I understand that thinking, but the fact is, if you are not eating, even if you appear to be doing absolutely nothing, your brain is eating up your muscles to keep itself going. And when you feel better again, say you're unwell and you come out of that illness, you may not be able to do the things you could do before. And that starts a process of a slow dwindling we want to avoid. Now, some things are unavoidable. And when people have become frail, of course, the support is slightly different. But providing protein in meals is always beneficial. And whatever an individual can do to move muscles, to do things that remind the muscles they're needed, every little thing is important. And that basically means, yes, walking and aerobic activity is great, whatever you can do, but pushing weights or pulling weights, and you can start off with small ones, but doing things with your muscles that make them realize they're really working, lifting things, pushing things with your legs, doing aquarobics where you're pushing in the water, all those things are the things you need. You need to build strength. Now, I've mentioned protein many times. And of course, it's a store in your muscles, but it comes from somewhere. Every single part, apart from my clothing, my glasses, and my headphones, every single part of me, every single part of you is made from food. When we eat food, it's assimilated into our body for whatever purpose that it's needed. The protein foods are things like animal foods like chicken, fish, meat, eggs. All those animal proteins are high quality proteins. Dairy foods are high in protein. And the interesting thing about dairy foods, and when I say protein, a chef would think of a protein as meat on a plate or eggs on a plate. But meat and eggs and any sort of food that contains protein is not 100% protein. It is a protein food, but it's also got other things. So they vary in their concentration of protein. So when you look at dairy food, it's clear you can look at it clearly. So when you look at dairy food, milk powder, for example, milk powder is very high in protein, and that's mainly because the water's been removed. Cheese, so milk powder is it varies, 80, 90% protein. So 90% of it is protein and other things as well. Cheese is also a concentrated form of dairy product because some of the water's been removed, and it's about 30-ish% protein depending on the cheese. Then you go to yogurt, which is also a really good source of protein, but between 5 to 10%, so it's got a lot of water. And then when you go to milk, it's even less, so it's about 3 or 4% protein. And that's not worth worrying about. You don't have to remember those numbers. You just have to think of the fact that it's more dilute. Now, the other protein foods, of course, come from plant foods. We've got a lot of nuts and seeds. All nuts and seeds are very good protein. pulses like dried peas, beans, lentils, chickpeas, soybeans, and any product made from soybeans. Sometimes people say to me, oh, mushrooms have got good protein, and they do contain protein, but they've also got a lot of air and a lot of water. So you actually need to have quite a large volume of mushrooms to get the same amount of protein as you might get, for example, from a slice of cheese. So those things are important. And I always say to people, you must focus on the protein foods. So you must, my message is always put a protein food at the center of every meal, because then when you use your muscles, it's there, and the muscle and the body can actually draw it in and put it where it needs to be. Even though you're always able to remind your muscles they're needed and they can try to rebuild, if you're not providing with the protein to put into them, then it might not happen as efficiently, and that's what you want. So most of us are pretty good at protein at dinner, main meal of the day. Most of us go with some sort of protein food, whether that's animal or plant-based. Moderately good at lunchtime. If you're making a cheese and salad sandwich, for example, you might put a slice of cheese and lots of salad, and that's great. The salad is important, and I'll come back to that. But one of the things that's worth remembering is that the protein needs to be more concentrated. An older person, a person over 70, needs more protein than a person of 50. So when we're focusing on protein at the center of the meal. So that means you put that at the center of every meal, including lunch. So when you're coming back to your cheese sandwich, you might want 3 slices of cheese and the salad, or cheese and ham and the salad, or cheese and salad and a big handful of nuts and a drink of milk, because all of those are protein foods. Or you just think about something, a piece of chicken and salad, for example, or whatever thing you might like. When it comes to breakfast, in the old days, people had mixed grills and eggs and bacon, and that's 2 different types of protein on the plate. That's a bonus to some extent. And remember, things are different when you're older. It's not great for the 30-year-old possibly every day, but actually it's not so much of a problem when you're older if you like it. The other option is you go for people, like fruit and yogurt is great breakfast, because it's got lots of good antioxidants, got a bit of protein, it's got useful things in it, but it doesn't have enough protein. It has a little bit of protein, but not enough. So if you're going to have fruit and yogurt, breakfast cereal, toast, you need to think of ways to get the protein in as well. So with yogurt, you can do things like you can actually add milk powder to it, because that's very high in protein. You can add ground nuts, have lots of nuts. You can make a high protein milk. If you're caring for someone who needs a bit extra, I often suggest get your milk, about 1 litre of milk, you get a cup of skim milk powder, mix it into your litre of milk, put it back in the fridge. Yes, it'll change the volume a bit. You'll have to take a bit out, but mix it up, put it back in the container, put it in the fridge. Then every time you're having milk in tea or coffee, a drink of milk, milk on your cereal, milk on your porridge, that's going to be higher in protein to start off with. You can also add milk powder into a lot of things. So if you're caring for someone who's very frail and your thinking isn't getting enough, what we often talk about, and what I've got lots of guidelines on in the book, and what we try and encourage people, is getting the most out of every single mouthful. So fortifying, as we call it, adding nutrition into each mouthful is really beneficial. So if you're making custard, a casserole, as long as it's not a clear-based gravy, if you're making gravy, if you're making a white sauce, you can easily add quite a lot of extra protein and calories by using milk powder, which has got a few extra calories, or skim milk powder, which is basically just the protein. Add it in, mix it in, you boost up the protein, you add a bit extra. Now, if you're not a milk drinker, there are other sorts of protein, pea protein and the like, that you can do the same with. You just have to work your recipes to find out flavors that work. Cheese, of course, is really great protein. Throw it on things. If you're having, if people love a plate of steamed vegetables, for example, great. They're fantastic for their antioxidants, which are the protective substances for the brain, for the cells in the body, brain and body. But throw a big handful of grated cheese on top, then you've got the protein as well as the vegetables. It's a way of thinking about things. You can also, of course, make up high protein drinks, like you can make a high protein milkshake or a high protein soy-based shake using, there's recipes in my book, but also there's plenty of recipes around using milk powder or other powder plus the basic milk plus flavouring, and then that's an alternative. There are commercial supplements some people might like to use, and there's nothing wrong with those. I just find that if you have the same thing every day, some people get bored. But if it's not boring and it's easy, that can be an alternative. You know, sometimes I see people who just love to have their tea and toast, and great, but tea and toast is not going to provide you with the nutrition you need. So rather than saying you can't have your toast, either you have your toast with a very thick amount of peanut butter, that's a nice protein, or toast with scrambled eggs on top. If you don't want that, what about a high protein drink and your toast? So you've got the both of them together. So it's protein at the center of every meal. And then there's so much to this subject, and we've only got a short amount of time, but then I'm going to talk about the protection. So you're not just going to eat protein on your plate. What I always say, protein food at the center of every meal, and no matter what the meal is, try and surround that with as many different colors as you possibly can. Now, I'm not meaning hundreds and thousands, strawberry syrup or something. What I mean is colors from fruit and vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains. So all the colors that are found in naturally occurring in foods, come from substances that conveniently are very beneficial to human bodies. They're substances, most of which are actually antioxidant. Some substances might have other components, but basically these substances are plant chemicals that we use to our advantage. Antioxidants and anti-inflammatory components in foods help our cells keep themselves healthy. So antioxidants in particular, their job is basically mopping up the waste products of a normal process in the body called oxidation. Oxidation just is how we run, how we keep ourselves going. But oxidation produces waste products that, if allowed to build up around your cells, can cause little bits of damage. And the longer you live, the more chance that those little bits of damage would build up and cause problems. So the more antioxidants we can have that work with the cells to mop up those oxidative wastes, as they're called, and take them away from the cells, the better off we are keeping ourselves protected. Now, marketing will often tell you that goji berries or blueberries or whatever, some other sort of thing is the latest, greatest thing. And all you have to do is take this pill or have half a cup or a cup of these things every day and everything will be fantastic. But in fact, the science over and over and over tells us none of them work on their own. They like to work together, they work together. And so the secret is, it's not a secret, the answer is having as many different types of antioxidants on your plate at the same time. And all that means is having different colors, because every different color is a different antioxidant, from pale green to dark green, from yellow to orange to red to purple to pink. And don't forget white. White from cauliflower, potatoes, whatever it happens to be, is also has a good variety of antioxidants, a very good variety of antioxidants, but they're white. And don't forget brown, grains, seeds, nuts. They also contain substances that give that color. So from now on, you're going to think you have to do stuff with your muscles. You must do stuff with your muscles no matter what. And people are going to say, oh, I can't, I don't. Well, whatever you can do. Find a program, find assistance that gives you advice on how to do things and try and build or rebuild the strength in your muscles. It'll be good for you getting about anyway, but every little bit, you might think, oh, I don't really need good biceps anymore. I don't use them for anything. But that little bit of protein you're storing in your biceps might just be what you need to get through an illness or whatever. And you're going to think about your meals when you're thinking about meals, protein and colors, and thinking about the fact that a 70-year-old, someone beyond 70, needs more protein, not less, than a 40, 50, 30-year-old. So the size of the protein on your plate really mustn't get any smaller as you get older. Now, I know it gets hard to eat a large serve of protein, and I will often find myself, now I'm 64, I will often find myself thinking, oh, I can't eat that large serve. But you have to find a way to get around it. Yes, you may not want to have that large serve, but you have to think of, right, well, I'm going to have a handful of nuts later on, or I'm going to have a piece of cheese after dinner, or I'm going to have a milk drink or something like that to give me that extra protein, because that's important. And thinking about ways to put protein into meals. And as I say in my book and my books, I can show you a picture while we're talking. I think I can grab one. Well, at the end I will. I give sort of a few recipes and ideas about how to boost protein in food. So it's very important, if you're caring for someone who's frail, even if they seem like they're doing very little, to make sure you're focusing on that. And of course, that's not all you eat. You obviously eat other things with it. If you're thinking about people who are so most of that guidance is for both people who are the carers and also people who are being cared about or for. But I'm going to focus a little bit more now on people who are already frail and what you need to do to support them. I could also talk a lot about dementia risk reduction, but really it's a whole other start. Although physical activity, antioxidants, keeping your brain going for the same things work well for the brain. But I want to talk, because of the audience, because of you in the audience, about how you can best support someone who is frail. There's a couple of things here that I often do talk about. Now, if someone's 90-something and they've got all the way to that age, then basically they should be able to enjoy their life, and they should be able to enjoy what they're eating. Now, someone who's 80 or 90 has got there because they actually did all the right things when they were young. What we would love young people to be doing is eating food that's undergone as few changes as possible from when it came out of the paddock, out of the ground, off the tree, out of the water, wherever it came from, as few changes as possible to that food before you put it in your mouth. Now, most people who are older, that's what they ate normally. They ate meat and vegetables that often they'd grown themselves. They were usually fresh, seasonal, or local. There was very little in the way of processed food. And some food processing is necessary to keep it safe, and some food processing is entertaining, for heaven's sake, because, we like chips made of different substances and the like. But we have to realise that sometimes that substance is a long, long way from the way it started out. If you're going to eat a loaf of bread with grains in it or whatever, that's had not too many changes from the start. But if that piece of bread is going to then be made into even if it's baked, not fried, as they say in the advertising, a little chip that's got all this flavouring on top, that's been baked in an oven and that's originally something else, it's a lot more steps. Now, I'm not saying those things are necessarily damaging, but the evidence shows that unprocessed and minimally processed food is much better for you. And the person who is now 80 or 90, that's what they grew up with, even the 70-year-olds. So they've already got the advantage. But these people who are older and maybe more frail need to be supported with food that they enjoy as much as possible, and food that is nourishing. And if appetite is very diminished, there's a whole chapter in my book on appetite, can be very diminished in older age. So it's, just finding ways to tempt the appetite. People worry about sugar, and yes, for the 30-year-olds and below, and even other ages, younger ages, sugar's a problem. But for older people, sugar can be a really good carrier of nutrients. If I've got someone who's very frail, who's not eating very well, and who wants 5 teaspoons of sugar in their cup of tea, it's much more important that that cup of tea goes in for its fluids, because dehydration is also very damaging, than that we worry about the sugar. Of course, it's a different world. So sweet things can be beneficial, and for people with dementia, often people living with dementia for some reason prefer highly flavoured, some people, or some people really do like to have additional salt or sugar. Now, yes, that's probably not ideal nutritionally, but the fact is, if the food's going in, that's the benefit. So we need to step back from what we need. So say you're a carer in your early 70s caring for someone who's in their 80s or 90s. Your needs are slightly different to that person. So separate them, work with those things. Lots of people like ice cream. I just get them to sprinkle lots and lots of a high protein supplement, like a Sustagen or something like that, if they like those. Or Milo's are good. So that sort of thing, a high protein Activite. Those sort of things sprinkle over ice cream, boost up the protein. So the ice cream still goes in, but you get something useful. Nuts, if people like to eat nuts. With people with dementia, it really is just finding ways to tap into what they might enjoy. And often it's things like making sure you set a table, because sometimes the systems around the meal are what bring people to tapping into the brain memories of needing to eat. So a set table often triggers a memory of, oh, it's time to eat. And that time, sometimes the food will go in more easily. There's lots of tips and tricks that could be used for people who are older and more frail. But I just beg people to separate their own needs. And also thinking about that fortification. So if you're making a porridge, for example, you can easily boost up the nutritional content of porridge by putting in additional milk powder. If people have issues with lactose intolerance, which can be a problem in some people, there are powders that don't contain lactose. One of the brands called Ensure is not a lactose-containing product, and you can use other things. You can also use ground nuts. I put almond meal into porridge, and it gives a slightly nutty taste and texture, which I really like, and it boosts up the protein. Grains contain protein, like oats and bread, the grains in bread, but they're not as high in protein as some of the other foods. So you need to eat, for example, you'd need to eat 6 to 8 slices of bread to get the same amount of protein as you would from a couple of slices of cheese. Obviously, it's much more difficult to eat the large amounts of bread. You can get the same protein, but it's much more difficult to eat. So it's thinking about ways to put in extra. And if people are only eating small amounts in their meals, then try for snacks. I've got lists of high protein snacks. Just go for snacks throughout the day. It doesn't matter if the whole day is snacks. For younger people, the latest trend is having longer times between meals. And that's helpful for younger people. And in fact, for most people who are now old, they had long breaks between meals. They didn't tend to eat lots of morning tea and afternoon tea. They often skipped meals because they were too busy out working. So they've already got those benefits. But now, having extra snacks can be really beneficial, more helpful than trying to get in a large meal. If people aren't going to eat the large meal, then it's no help to you at all. It's making sure the food gets in. It's more important that the food goes in than you worry about whether something is salty or sugary or whatever it happens to be, or fatty. Lots of people go back. When most of my older clients really love things like fish and chips, and it was a treat food. You went out and got those things. Try when you get the fish and chips. They're fantastic. Of course, they've got lots of calories, and that's really good because you need to keep up the calories as well, just to keep the body running. But try and make sure that there's plenty of fish inside that batter or crumb. Sometimes I worry when especially in some situations, aged care situations, they might have bought in battered or crumbed fish, but sometimes the portions of fish are very small. They might taste all right, but we need to make sure that that protein, which of course is the fish component, is there as well. And it doesn't matter really what the food is. If sometimes people with dementia want to eat the same food all the time. If you can get that food to be a protein food, or if you can boost protein in that food, it doesn't really matter, so long as the nutrients are going in. And if you're concerned, and people will drink something like one of these high protein commercial supplements, then they can be useful because they are fortified with vitamins and minerals. I think we're coming up to our 45 minutes, and we're going to have 15 minutes after this for questions. This was a recorded session, but I'm going to be in for the question session after this when it goes live. So I'd be happy to try and answer as many questions if you have any after the session. And I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope I've given you help. Oh, I'm going to show you the book just a minute. It's behind me. Here you go. Sorry, I should have got it out. This is my book if anyone's interested, called Brain, Body, Food. And it's not essential to buy a copy, but it will give you a lot of the information that I've talked about. And it gives you some simple tips that you can use further on. You can get that from my website, which is just in my name, or you can ask around at bookshops or online, of course. And there's even an audio book that I read. So thank you so much for listening. I hope it's been great, and I look forward to your questions.
With that, I'd like to welcome Ngaire to the webinar. So Ngaire, welcome. Thank you for joining us for this part of the day.
Thank you, Matthew. Great can you hear me okay?
We can. We can.
Great. Excellent. Good. Excellent.
Okay. So if you got some questions, please do put them in the chat bar. We've got a few people joining us today. So also, if you want to ask a question, if your microphone's working, do raise your hand. I'm sure we can invite you along. I know that Janelle's in the chat has just asked a question. I love dairy food, especially cheese, but it leaves me feeling very bloated. What can I do about that?
That's interesting. You may have an issue with tolerating potentially the lactose in the cheese or something else. Well, in dairy food. So cheese doesn't contain very much of the substance called lactose, but milk does. So it may be the dairy foods that you consume, the liquid type ones that have got the lactose in it. The reason why cheese doesn't contain much is because in the process of making cheese, some of the lactose is used up. Processed cheese, the slices that you get that are more sort of bendable texture, I suppose, those contain lactose. So I would be looking at, if you have problems with this, I would be looking at maybe reducing the amount of processed cheese and maybe going for lactose-free milk. Reducing the amount of processed cheese, and when you go to milk, going for lactose-free milk, and just see if that makes a difference. So you can buy that quite easily in the shops now. And just making sure that you mix it up with other things so that you're not eating it on its own might help. But if you're really concerned about that, I would go try and get yourself a referral from your GP, maybe to a local dietitian who could look at what you're eating, because it might be a specific thing that I can't really answer generally here. I hope that helps, Janelle.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ngaire. Janelle, if you got any response to that, please do put it in the chat bar. I would love to hear from you. Another comment we had, question we had earlier was a lot of carers, I guess, are time poor, and the question was, are there any sort of frozen meals that are a good option for adding and tips for adding protein for them? So I guess the question is around frozen meals.
Yeah. So there's frozen meals, and nowadays there's also these ones that are packaged in a sort of vacuum packaging that, it's inside the container box, but the vacuum, the plastic stuff on top has been sucked down onto the product. And those things are shelf stable or fridge stable. And so those things can be helpful. And there's a number around nowadays that are actually targeting really the younger people bodybuilder market, called muscle foods or higher in protein. And really those bodybuilders don't really need it because they've got all the, their hormones keeping them building muscle. But for older people, they're quite useful because they are higher in protein. So there's no problems with those ones that are identified as high protein. Try those. But I often say to my own mother, who, sometimes likes to eat light and easy or whatever it happens to be, or even Weight Watchers meals because they just happen to, she likes the look of them. I always say, well, okay, they're not too bad, but get yourself a packet of grated cheese, if you tolerate cheese, of course, or ground nuts or something like that that's high in protein, and add that to it, because a Weight Watchers or a low-calorie meal is not going to be enough for an older person. It's fine for a younger person losing weight, but you need to add some protein and a few calories. So, put a bit of extra butter on the veggies in that meal and add some cheese to boost up the protein. So then then you're actually getting something. So there's no problems. I get it completely when you're busy and time poor. And that's why I give a list of sort of suggested high calorie snacks, in my books and, and talking, because those sort of things can just be something you can put in between meals when you're in a hurry, or, things you just don't have time to pull it all together. Fair enough.
Thanks, Sarah. In regards to that snacks, are there any sort of high protein snacks that you'd recommend for people to graze on during the day? I know you've got a list of them in your book, but any particular... Well,
things like, for people who can tolerate it, cheese is great because it's a high protein, high calorie, good calcium, and if you like it, great. And of course, if you're younger, people, worry about this, worry about that, but actually it's a different message, of course. Cheese is a good thing. Sometimes I say to people, depending on if you've got someone who's, hungry and you're just needing bits, get yourself something like a barbecue chicken, break it up, keep it in the fridge, have a few bits now and then, have that out. Well, you're not going to put it out on the table, but every now and then that can be just a snack, just a few bits of that, little cans of tuna or salmon, or nowadays you can get cans of beans and mixed things that have got beans and corn and various spices. Those are little things to have on hand, can be useful. Nuts, if you can tolerate nuts, but otherwise any sort of butter made from nuts, it doesn't matter whether it's almond or peanut or whatever it happens to be, spread it on nice and thick onto a piece of bread or whatever, then you've got, that's a good snack as well. So those are the sort of things. Look, if people like things like party pies and it's not too much of a hassle to heat them up, those are actually not too bad. I know they get a bad rap in aged care and whatever, and fair enough, but if they're given all the time, but lots of people really like them. Little, those frozen nuggets type things, lots of people like them too. So for older people who are frail, those can be a nice crunchy protein calorie thing. Yeah, it's not good for your, 20-year-old grandson maybe, or your 5-year-old grandson all the time, but it's fine for those. So yeah, different.
And I guess what we were talking about today is that idea that our diets are different. We hear about the diets for the 30 to 40 to 50-year-olds. And so I guess for hearing now that, party pies and all these little things are really good for us in our older age, I guess it's a really refreshing message to hear.
Yeah, look, lots of my clients love these things. And yes, they get a really bad rap. And actually often I think in the aged care setting, family come in and they're there only for the evening meal. Now, I'm not defending, because there are a lot of issues with food in residential aged care, but family often come in for the snack meal. We all know when we're at home, sometimes our lunch is our snack meal. And you might actually have something like, a couple of pieces of cheese on a bit of bread because you're in a hurry, or you might, if there was a party pie or something available, you might even have that as a snack. And so actually in lots of residential aged care settings, the snack meal is the evening meal. And yeah, party pies every night is not a great idea, and there's problems with that. But if that's the treat that you have, when you're having a light meal, it's not so bad. So we have to keep thinking of that and realizing that things are slightly different, and so long as the rest of the day pans out, sometimes that's all right, and it can be a good way. And as I said, I mentioned before that sometimes appetites are very diminished in people who are frail, and so anything that you can get that's going to entice that appetite back, that's going to make people think, oh, I quite like that, whether it's the crunchy crispiness of potato chips or whatever it happens to be, then that's a good thing. And then maybe you also get the nutrition of the meal. And I can actually see that Cheryl's asked a question on limiting eggs for older people, and I would say no. There's years ago, eggs got such a bad rap years ago, but actually there was really not a lot of reason for it. They do contain cholesterol. Cholesterol is a natural and essential component. It's part of every single one of our cell membranes. It's part of the structure of cells. It's important, but when you have too much saturated fat in your diet, you can mess up the levels in your blood, of course. But and the eggs were never really too much of a problem. So really there's no limits on that. And certainly if you've got your own chickens or anything, then those eggs are great. But wherever you get them from, they're a good source of protein. Many people really love them. They're easy to eat. you can throw them into other things as well, boost up the protein in something else that you, by adding an egg here and there. So yeah, I wouldn't say for a lot of people there's any problem with eggs.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ngaire. Thanks, Cheryl, for that question. I've probably got time for one or two more questions. If you are out there watching, do feel free to put your question in the chat bar, in the questions and answer. We might have time for one more from there. Just another question that came up earlier was, do you have any suggestions for healthy snacks for people that are sort of on the go, so like those grab and go snacks that they have in the pantry or the fridge? I know you talked about the chicken already.
Yeah, it's a bit more difficult to carry with you, isn't it? I would say that in general, and I know it's a bit of the grab and go it's an interesting concept because there's a lot of food products now that are marketed at the grab and go. I would look for things that have, again, undergone as few changes from that original food as possible. So while there are a lot of packaged and small snacky sort of items you can get in the supermarket, just think about how much that food resembles where it started and try and go for more of the things that have undergone few changes. So, you know, nuts and seeds and like a bag of what we would have called scroggin when you're going on a bushwalk, that sort of like nuts and maybe little bits of chocolate and dried fruits. That's a really good snack to take along in a small box or container, you know, for people. But some people can't tolerate nuts very well, so that's not always the issue. You know, interestingly, if you're out and about and you just need to keep someone's appetite on the go and you need to keep them engaged, things like chocolate, not all the time, of course, but it's a really easy to carry and people like it. And it's a bit of a treat. And it keeps the enticement in the appetite when you feel like you're getting a treat. But other things like cheeses, the more processed cheeses, which aren't ideal, but they're also high in calories and protein. So they can come in little packets. We used to get the old cheese sticks years ago, and there are similar things to that, not quite exactly the same nowadays. There's little snack packs of cheese and crackers. You can also get nowadays snack packs of like salsa and corn chips. Some people like that. They're not necessarily high in protein, those ones, but it's a good way to get in just to keep the mind thinking food. And of course, flavoured milk. If you're out and about and you want something rather a good thing to choose at a cafe or something rather as a milkshake or a flavoured milk drink, because that's high in protein. Most people like them. It's a bit of a treat. It's a bit of bit of carbohydrate, a bit of sweetness. It's nice, so those sort of things can be useful. And you don't have to have the great big, ice milkshake container. You can have a smaller one. Sometimes you can ask for, a half size or whatever and get those things in. So, yeah, I would say those are good grab and go things. And nowadays, when my children were young, we didn't have them, but those plastic packets with a top on them that you can pull off of yogurt. To me, it's just still a weird concept that you eat yogurt out of a plastic sort of sachet thing, but it happens all the time, and that's a useful thing if people like it.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ngaire. Where can we find for you? One more question. I think we'll squeeze
Soy
in.
milk.
Soy milk. Is it a good source of protein?
It is. The only one you have to be careful of in the things called milk is almond milk. Now, almonds themselves are high in protein, great food, but the stuff that they call almond milk in the shops is actually not high protein, because what they've done is blended up the almonds and made them into a liquid that has the texture and the look of a cow's milk, but that end product is not high in protein. So if you're eating almond milk, and I worry about children who are being given almond milk, because not that the almond milk itself is a problem, but they're getting about a third of the protein that someone having cow's milk would. So almond milk's a bit of a issue in that. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not got enough protein. So soy milk, yes. Years ago, there was a government an initiative that said that if soy milk was to be used as an alternative to cow's milk, it had to have the same protein levels. So they make it with a similar protein level to milk. So yes, and nowadays they also have to add calcium and the like. So soy milk's fine. And as if you wanted to be using soy protein as a fortifier to add into foods, then there are soy proteins and pea proteins, powders that you can add into foods to boost up protein without it having to be a dairy food. So yeah, no difference really as far as protein.
Wonderful. Thanks, Narrator. Thanks everyone for those questions in the Q&A. That was really wonderful to hear the responses following the talk today. Where can we find more information about you and your book, Narrator? Do you have a website or?
Yeah, I do. It's just in my name. It's www, of course, it's ngairehobbins.com. And then on Facebook, it's Ngaire Hobbins Dietitian. Same on Instagram, it's Ngaire Hobbins Dietitian, just to find. And I post little bits and pieces. I try hard. Oh, but you know, all that social media stuff, it's another thing to do in the day. So yeah, it was great.
Ngaire, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. It was great to listen to you, and I'm sure we're all going to be taking away so many different tips, ideas, and thoughts about food and how important it is for all of us. And I thank you for being a part of this week's Carers Festival, the Carers Festival, which Carers New South Wales is doing these online events. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you for having me. It was fabulous. Great.
Wonderful. And thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you all again at another event soon.